Okay, so the second story is from a poet. This is going to be Homer. You've heard of Homer, right? How many, have you read the Odyssey? Have any of you read the Odyssey? Have you read the Iliad? Get away, did you really? Okay, so the Odyssey is about, who's the hero of the Odyssey?
Odysseus.
Odysseus, that was a no-brainer, right? Okay, that was like a trick question. Okay, good. So Odysseus is our hero. Remember, the Trojan War has been going on. When we pick it up in the Iliad, it's been going on for about 10 years. Okay, it's the end of the thing. Everybody's left. Okay, remember, they end the war. Remember the Trojan horse and all that stuff? That's actually not in the Iliad. That's actually in the Odyssey, believe it or not. So we have the end of the war in the Iliad. Now the Odyssey is a little bit of a different make. The Iliad has historical elements to it, at the very least. It is not clear that the Odyssey as a story does. Okay, which kind of makes it occupy a rather strange place in Western thinking. Okay, so we have the story of Odysseus. He's on his way home. But Odysseus, he's called Polymetes in Greek. He's called Polymetes, it means he's the many wild one. Okay, Odysseus is he's a clever talker. He's clever. And he's kind of like a very early on politician. He kind of finagles things. He kind of gets in and out and uses it, and he doesn't implicate himself in real actions, at least in the Odyssey. He's great at getting out of scrapes. Okay, that's his real talent in life. So we have Odysseus. He's on his way home, but one of the things that Odysseus is really good at is he insults gods. Okay, and that's usually bad news. And so the gods remember that, and on his way home, the gods start messing with him, and they mess with this poor dumb guy for 10 whole years. So before he actually gets home, we have 10 years of the Trojan War, and then we have 10 years of Odysseus trying to get home to his wife, right? And it just doesn't, poor Odysseus, right? The guys, when one god leaves him alone, another god starts in, right? So this guy is actually getting hammered by the gods all the way along the line. And he goes through all the different episodes that a hero would possibly go through. Remember, he's going to end up with the Lotus Eaters. Do you remember that one? Where they're all doing drugs all the time. And Odysseus is trying to, if I get lost here, man, I'm lost for a long time, right? Or he meets Polyphemus, right? The Cyclopes, the Cyclops guy, right? And the Cyclops guy is busy trying to eat them all. And so Odysseus has to use his Polymetes. He has to use his mind, his imagination to try to figure out how to get out of these situations. And you'll remember that, so you know about the Cyclops stories, right? Okay, and he gets his guys out of there. Remember, he meets the witch, and the witch transforms all his men into various animals and stuff like that. And so Apollo shows Odysseus how to save his men, which he does, remember, and he has to eat this famous plant called the moly plant. I told my wife this story the other day, because in English we still say holy moly. Right? And she didn't believe me, but that actually does come from the moly plant, right? Which it comes from the story of the Odyssey, just to show you that the story is alive and well in Western culture. So he eventually does get home. He eventually is reunited with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, and he does win back his throne in Ithaca, etc., etc. He kills all the bad guys, and that's kind of the story. Now, you have a right to ask the question, bless you. You have a right to ask this question, what does that have to do with anything in this context? That's actually a fair question, okay? The story in and of itself, I don't think really does. I mean, it was certainly not Homer's intention. But what is going to happen at the end of the war, the Second World War, is that there is a German university in Frankfurt, and it becomes very, very famous for its political thinking. And there are two folks, Horkheimer and Adorno, who will write a book called The Dialectic of Enlightenment, Aufklärung, which is to say a response, if you will, to the Enlightenment that happens in France in the 18th century, that we all use our reason and we live happily ever after. Okay? Now, the book that they write, The Dialectic of Enlightenment, is actually a critique of the Enlightenment because, frankly, they think that it failed. Because as they look at the political structures that came out of the Nazi state and that kind of domination, they do not see that reason has led to any enlightenment, frankly. Right? And the way that they begin to criticize this is actually to go back to the story of Odysseus. Isn't that interesting? So you have philosophers who are using mythology to make statements about politics. Right? Now, this is how they're going to do that. They're going to look very specifically at the encounter between Odysseus and Polyphemus, the Cyclops, right? Remember, Polyphemus is one eye in the middle of his head. He's the son of Poseidon. He lives alone on an island because now he's not the only, there are other Cyclopes, there are other Cyclops, but they each live on their own little island. They each live on their own, in their own agricultural economy. They live isolated and they live as brutes, okay, as savages. And they eat anything that they want to eat. They are a law unto themselves. Well, when Odysseus shows up, Odysseus is kind of light-handed. He likes to steal stuff. So, there's some sheep hanging around, so I think, that could be good. And then, you get the milk and okay, so they're in the cave. The Cyclops comes home. He smells them. And he's going to eat them, predictably, in the story. And there is a thing that happens. That is to say that in the evening, he eats the one, or he eats two, or something like that. And then he goes to sleep, okay? Because Odysseus, Polymetes, he creates a fermented drink to give the Cyclops, and he makes him drunk, right? So he's eating these guys, remember the whole flock of Odysseus' comrades, they're all there. And so he's drunk, he's eating these guys, and then he falls dead asleep. And Odysseus blinds him. He creates this big stake, sticks it in his one eyeball when he's sleeping, and of course at this point Polyphemus is blind, okay, and he's in this blind animal rage. And, but he still, remember the daily routines of living, you still have to let the sheep out and stuff like that. Odysseus figures out a way to sneak out his remaining guys in the morning because the Cyclops is busy touching all the animals, but where is he not touching them?
Belly.
On their bellies, right? And so the men are hanging by the fur underneath, right? And so they all get out, and then when Odysseus is outside, he starts mocking Polyphemus. He calls him names like, you're down like this, right? You're a blind Cyclops, what good is that, etc., etc. So he calls him all kind of names. It's really not very sporting of him, but nobody said that Odysseus was a nice guy. So all that being said, Adorno and Horkheimer write this book in 1944 in which they look at this conflict between Odysseus and Polyphemus, and they suggest that this is somehow indicative of the need, of the fury for civilization. Because you have Odysseus, who becomes, if you will, in this metaphor, it's a metaphorical reading of the Odyssey, he becomes the metaphor of the civilized man who uses his mind to solve his problems. And on the other hand, you have this natural man, this uncivilized brute, this monster, who is living very close to nature, who is not civilized. He doesn't live in groups. He doesn't care about social interests and things of this nature. So that how they use this story is to tell us that human reason should work to conquer nature. All right? It's called the Enlightenment Project that comes out of this. That's the second story. So the story is I'm giving you Homer through Horkheimer and Adorno. Isn't that nice? Like, whoa, I never heard of these guys. Okay. In theory, then, we have the idea that the West has seen this as a good, that men should use their minds to overcome the problems of nature, that men should use their minds to get us out of the kinds of messes that men tend to get into when they're acting for their own interest or when they're acting on a primitive level. Do you see how that story is going to work out? It's actually an interesting read. I'm not opposed to that. I'm absolutely certain that Homer didn't know any of that. Okay? But hey. Alright, so that's story number 2. So story number 1, we have the idea that we will act like the Cyclops if left alone. That's Gyges, remember? Okay, we will act unjustly. We will act in a primitive fashion if left alone and not accountable. The other part is so we need to create the environment in which we can act well, in which justice can happen. We then come to the Odyssey, and Homer, through a door-mill and Horkheimer, will remind us that the mind is the tool that we have to conquer nature. Okay?